One of the things that I often think about is how wildly off we are in our inferences on everyday life. And I think all of us often are extraordinarily off. And I was just thinking, I often use the context of, salaries and careers and things like that, because that's what I know. Um, but it applies to a lot of contexts. And we have this idea that um, we often look at these very sort of sensational or exciting careers that make a lot of money, and we think that um, then it's a viable career for most people. And if you start investigating it, so there's two things that you should look at, right? So that besides many different criteria, but um, the two sort of salient things I think about this is just boiling it down into two numbers. The first one being is how much you're going to make, right? I think that that is really incredibly important to look at how much you're going to make, right? Like you want ultimately a career that's going to be sort of sustainable and allow you to get there. And then the second thing is what is the probability of you getting that? So giving a sample of, you know, uh, say 1,000 people, right? How many people that try of that 1,000 people to go into that career actually do make it? And I think about this a lot. Um, I think about this because we often get this so wrong that we often look at it and we say, well, we want a career that's, makes a lot of money. So we often want a career that makes a lot of money, right? And what do we often think about when you say a career that makes a lot of money? Um, that often, the easiest thing to think about is sort of draw from our sample of knowledge of experience that we see, right? And we go to the things that are really exciting. Often they are the things that are on TV or social media, or things that are very bright and that attract attention. They're designed intentionally designed to attract attention. And so we think about things like, you know, uh, an entrepreneur, or uh, you know, maybe a movie star. Maybe it is, uh, maybe it's a social media influencer. We think of these things like, Mr. Beast or whatnot, right? Where it's sort of drawn from these. We say, hey, we could do that. He makes a lot of money, or they make a lot of money. And why not pursue that? That is perfectly wise until you actually start looking at the probability of getting there, right? So the probability of getting there for any number of these tends to be really, really poor, right? Like an athlete, for example, become a world, uh, not only a world class athlete, but a world class athlete within a genre of sports that does very well in terms of having a financial return, right? Like you could be a world class athlete in, pole vaulting, but that doesn't really generate that much revenue, at least not that I know of. Uh, so when you break it down to that, you start seeing that, yeah, the likelihood of you getting that is slim to none. But we face this tension, right? We often don't think about probabilities of things happening. I don't think we do that a very good job. I think that there's fairly good evidence at this moment, that we as human beings do a really bad job of estimating the probability of things happening. But so what we'll do is we'll look at, hey, just that salary, that's fantastic. We're going to become that. And then, once we become a musician or, want to be a movie star or go into athlete, whatever it is, sports, you realize it's a lot more harder than you think it is, right? The returns are so poor often uh, for the average, right? So what happens in these kind of domains is that they're dominated by a few individuals that make a lot of money. This is really typical as what to expect. They're dominated by a few people that make a lot of money or a few companies that make a lot of money, and then most don't, right? Like and not even reasonably close, like really poor. Uh, so for example, if you want to become an influencer, right? I've got probably 100,000 followers now across different platforms. Um, I make as much money as I can pay myself a dinner every month. And that's all I make with that many followers. And I've been working at this for a long time. And this is very, very, very typical. In fact, I'm well above average in terms of, my influence and all that kind of stuff. So, if you start breaking things down, and you often hear like people encouraging people, go try to become an athlete or, go do these kind of things without, and that's often the problem is that there isn't a calculation of what is the probability of actually succeeding in that particular domain with a reasonable, livable salary or a livable wage, right? You start looking at that, it's actually really, really poor. And if you combine those two things that you're supposed to do, this is basic sort of economics. What we're supposed to do is to get an expected value calculation where we multiply what is the likelihood of something occurring times how much we would actually get out of it. That equation changes dramatically. And what you're going to see is that a lot of things that are very non-exciting tend to be very good careers for most people to go into. And these tend to be very normal, boring things that a lot of us actually know and understand. And we bumped into many people that have done those things before, right? Like somebody that's just in sales, in corporate sales, for example. You will meet a lot of people in your life that's just in corporate sales, and they will make a decent salary, but nothing too spectacular, right? They're in some company, some company that has a couple, maybe 100 people, maybe 200 people, maybe even 5,000 people. But generally, they will do okay and they'll have a reasonable life. Or maybe it is somebody that manages a restaurant for somebody else. And you'll look at it, you'll say, well, that person's not the entrepreneur, but they still have a fairly good salary once you make that sort of an expected value calculation. And it's a value, very, uh, it's a career, not only that has a stable, fairly good high income, a reasonably high income, but also the chance of you getting into something like that is pretty significant. It's much higher than another domain. And that's what I encourage people to look at that. Once you start looking at that, you'll start seeing like careers that are really not exciting, that nobody talks about, tend to be exceptional careers. Construction, for example, nobody cares about that. Becoming a plumber, nobody cares about that. Nobody's really excited about it, but it has a pretty good expected value. Not to mention, if you work at it and build a fleet of, you learn the business of it, you learn how to run a team, Then you learn how to run 2 teams. Eventually, you can get like 3 or 4 or even 5 teams that are together working for you. That becomes a very substantial income. And yet you'll never be able to tell somebody that, when you tell somebody I'm a plumber, uh, they will automatically default to saying, that person's not doing that well. But it's actually the complete opposite. I want you to think about that in all areas of your life. And the way that you do this is sort of a practical, easy way to do this is in your life, right? Like, I want you to think about maybe it's the 30 people in your life that you could probably name, right? Aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, uh, friends and family. Just name them all out, right? Uh, write them all out and start looking and rank ordering the ones that actually you think actually do quite well. And what you'll see is that with that, most of the things are things like, sales. Maybe some people are engineers. Maybe some people are nurses. Um, very ordinary, standard things. Maybe mechanic, right? Standard, ordinary things. We start looking at that. What was the chance? How difficult was it to get into? What are the, you know, what are the hurdles to get into? How much does it cost? Doing all the calculations on that, where you do a financial calculation of how much it costs to get the education for it. You'll realize that these kind of middle of the road things that are really not exciting at face value tend to be actually the best things for you to go into. They're the most solid. You have the most opportunities often. And if you do things right, and you have a lot of serious motivation, as if you would have the same motivation to play in the NHL, to play in the National Hockey League, the professional league of soccer, whatever, right? That you're actually training, you're working at it, you're learning all of the skills, the skill sets, you're getting coached, all of those things. If you were to do that, you would do exceptionally well along the way. But the problem is nobody ends up doing those things. People don't believe in education. Uh, they often don't want to go through all the hurdles of continuously upgrading and doing all this kind of thing. So we'll never see what is the maximum potential often. And often it can be extraordinarily high because those businesses, those careers, they're demonstrated repeatedly that they're in high demand in most places, right? Most places around the world, those sort of boring things that nobody really cares about. We know that there's many people that need that help. So I want you, before you start looking at, like, I want to become a movie star, or I want to become an influencer, or any of these kind of things, that you look at it and at face value, yeah, there's fame, and there may be an income that's associated with it is significantly high. But what you're not doing is not accounting for all of those different factors that sort of suppress why it is so hard to get into those particular areas, right? Like, you don't see that information, why many people are not doing it. You don't see that, right? And if it looks too good to be true, it almost always is. The boring, the plain, the ordinary are often the best things for you to often do, sort of career wise or alternatives, compared to the sensational, the exciting, and all of those kind of things. And if you were to do that over the course of a lifetime, making these very plain, ordinary, well calculated decisions repeatedly, you could do exceptionally well. But it requires an awful lot of work, a lot of dedication, and a constant reminding yourself not to go after the sensational, right? And that means if you are, maybe you are in high school right now, making that choice, or maybe you're in college right now, making that choice to say, everybody is running after that. They're all running after the one career thing. Maybe it's getting onto Wall Street. Maybe it is becoming a professional athlete. And everybody's running after those things. Instead of doing that, you say, you know, I should apply myself in other areas that allow me to generate a better return. So I'm going to look at, in every um in every town there's a hospital. So maybe I will go and become a nurse. But not only that, once I get my nursing degree, maybe I'll upgrade, become a nurse practitioner. And then maybe I will upgrade again and become a nurse anesthetist. And maybe I upgrade again and really upskill and become the best nurse anesthetist. Or I upgrade and become a physician, an anesthesiologist, right? And it's a sort of upgrading and continuous improvement that will drive a lot of wealth for you, but at the same time, allow you to make wise decisions along the way that are really boring if you think about it. They're very boring, they're very straight and narrow, but they have your best return almost always. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.